Protest sparks in Beirut over Lebanon's economic meltdown.
Authorities report 2 people were injured. More details on this later in the news. Good evening. I am Ricky Mathay.
And I am Nina Richielago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Now for the headlines. Lawmakers claim Senate wants Constituent Assembly to amend the Philippine Constitution. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. warns of water crisis. Pag-asa cautions the public as El Nino season begins. Chinese military insists warned U.S. warship must leave South China Sea. And Russian top diplomat claims arresting President Vladimir Putin abroad is a declaration of war.
Благодаря таланту, энергии, труд за преданность большому и внесены.
A breakthrough in efforts to amend the 1987 Constitution. It is reported that House Speaker Martin Romualdez is now convinced to follow the steps taken by the Senate, amending the charter through Constituent Assembly. Mian Corvera reports.
Proponents of the charter amendments in the House of Representatives say that House Speaker Martin Romualdez is convinced to amend the economic provisions of the Constitution through a Constituent Assembly, the mode pushed by the Senate. Later, Representative Richard Gomez announced the result of his discussion with Romualdez after the PDP Laban meeting on Tuesday, which decided to support the efforts of Senator Robin Hood Padilla for Cha-Cha. Gomez told Romualdez that only economic provisions of the charter will be touched and the House of Representatives will vote separately.
Nung nireport ko sa House Leader namin, yun na pag-usapan namin sa PDP, na ang pag-uusapan lang ho natin sa Constitutional Amendment, tatlo lang ho. Tatlo lang. Number 1, CONAS, Constituent Assembly, pumayag si Speaker. Okay? Pangalawa, economic provisions lang yung pag-uusapan natin. Pumayag si Speaker. Pangatlo, voting separately. Pumayag si Speaker. Yan yung stand ng House. So we agree on all the conditions that the Senate wants with regards to constitutional amendment.
Although the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments is pushing for a hybrid constitutional convention to change the Constitution, Gomez said Romualdez agreed to heed the mood pushed by the Senate and any differences for the provisions will be discussed in bicameral conference committee, like the approval of any ordinary piece of legislation which Padilla uploaded.
When I reported to our Speaker, he said yes.
With the new development, Padilla says he will not push through with his plans to invite counterparts from the lower chamber headed by Cagayan de Oro Congressman Rufus Rodriguez. Instead, his committee will start drafting his committee report to be circulated and signed by the senators. Padilla is hopeful that the step taken by the lower chamber will hasten the approval of the Cha-Cha.
Napakalaking bagay po na nagbigay daan ang ating malaking kapulungan. Katulad po ng sinabi niya, CONAS na sila, voting separately, at economic provisions. Ang linaw po noon. Wala na po ako sigurong hihilingin pa.
Padilla and Gomez assured the public that no political provisions will be inserted in efforts to amend the Constitution.
Every year, pinagkakatiwalaan nyo kami. Pag ginagawa natin, isa sa pinakamalaking batas na ginagawa natin every year, which is the budget law. And you trust all these people, the Senate and Congress, with trillions of pesos. Tapos hindi nyo pagkakatiwalaan, aamyendahan natin yung batas para yung Constitution, para sa kabubuti ng bansa natin.
Hindi po kami papayag na magkakaroon ng insertion ng political structure. Dahil hindi naman po ito yung tamang oras. Kasi kung gusto po natin maging mabilis, economic provision lang po tayo. Katulad nga po ni Secretary, sabi ni Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, kaya niyang tapusin ng 1 linggo.
But Padilla admitted that should amendments in the economic provisions succeed, he will then push for the amendments in the term of office of local officials.
Hindi po ako titigil magsulong din. Pagkatapos po nito, kasi kailangan din po talagang baguhin yung political structure. Lalong-lalo na po talaga sa termino ng local leaders. Sa totoo lang po, ma'am, sa loob po ng maraming taon, ang tatay ko naging governor, ang tatay ko naging vice governor. Mismo sa bibig niya, sinasabi niya, ang iksi nung 3 taon. Hindi sapat. Kasi yung unang taon, rumi-recover ka pa lang galing dun sa eleksyon. Bali 1 taon ka lang nagsisilbi, anak, sabi niya. Kasi yung susunod na taon, ang pinag-uusapan nyo, kampanya na.
Padilla's party, PDP Laban, says they will launch a massive information drive to make the public aware on the importance of amending economic provisions of the charter as directed before by former President Rodrigo Duterte. The party has yet to release the approved resolution supporting charter change since the document is routed with members for their signatures.
Pati yung sa voting separately, we have addressed it in a resolution. I don't want you to put on hold or suspense. Kung pwede ko na lang sanang i-release nga. But we already have the draft and it's already been adopted unanimously by all the members. It's just that I don't want to release it without everyone signing it right now. But ang importante nga rito, we are all for charter change. So yun, and focusing mainly on the economic provisions of our Constitution.
Mayan Corvera for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
As the world commemorates World Water Day on Wednesday, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. warns of a water crisis in the country. He announces the creation of an agency that will address the problem. Eden Santos for the details.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has warned of a water crisis in the country. The president made the warning as he announced the creation of a new Office of Water Management to address the country's water problem. In his address during the 6th Water Philippines Conference and Exposition in Pasay City, Marcos says the country should use the best practices of other nations in water management to address the ongoing water problem. The president cited the experience of Israel, who took advantage of modern technology to address its need for water.
I spent some time in Israel, and I saw that how they treat the water, because water is very scarce. They live in the desert. Nevertheless, they are able to collect the water during the rainy season, whatever is available. They put fish in it to grow fish. When the summer comes, they take it out. Take out the water, harvest the fish, and then that goes to irrigation and for. So in essence, they use water 3 times. Every bit of fresh water is used always more than once. These are the kinds of thinking that we have to apply to the Philippines because of the crisis that we are facing, and how debilitating it will be to the entire economy, to the entire society, if our water supply problem continues to get greater, continues to become more dependent on what we have been doing in the past.
The president said the Office for Water Management will pave the way for the creation of policies needed by the government to address the water crisis. The new office will exist until Congress has passed the proposal to create the Department of Water Management, one of the priority legislations of the administration.
And so when they say water is life, it's not just a cliche. It's a truism, and it is something that we must always keep in mind, especially now. And that's why we in the government, I just have signed an executive order wherein we have created the Office of Water Management.
The palace has yet to issue the details of the new executive order. Marcos made the announcement a day after the World Water Day celebration declared by the United Nations to stress the importance of fresh water. According to the National Water Resource Board, or NWRB, almost 11 million Filipinos have no access to clean water. Eden Santos for Matanang Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, has moved to a later date the period for the filing of Certificate of Candidacy, or COC, for the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections, or BSKE, in October. In a message with COMELEC reporters, COMELEC Chairman George Garcia says instead of July 4 to 10, the filing of COC will be moved between the last week of August to the first week of September. The poll body had originally scheduled the filing of candidacy to a much earlier date to be able to prepare for the October local polls. But Garcia says the poll body decided to move it to a later date in consideration of the preparations of other stakeholders, including the Philippine National Police and other government agencies. Parañaque Congressman Gus Tambunting filed a resolution in the House of Representatives urging COMELEC to reconsider the date of COC filing to avoid any problems, which may include campaign fatigue among voters. Garcia assures that the poll body's calendar of activities will not be affected by the move since COMELEC has completed printing 91 million ballots, including the printing of 1.6 million as additional ballots based on the new voter registrants from December 12, 2022 until January 31, 2023.
The Commission on Elections has announced it will increase the honoraria or allowance for teachers serving as election officers in the coming barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections. The poll body is also considering Vice President Sara Duterte's request to release the honoraria earlier than scheduled. Madrin Villar Moratillo has the story.
Good news for the public school teachers who will serve as election officers in the Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections for BSKE in October. The Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, has announced that it will increase the honoraria or allowance given to teachers serving as Board of Election Inspectors, or BEI, for the local polls. COMELEC Chairman George Garcia says from the former 4,000 to 6,000 pesos, their honoraria will be increased from 8,000 to 10,000 pesos. The amount is equivalent to the allowance received by teachers who served during the automated elections. Garcia assured that the poll body is also studying the possibility of releasing the honoraria earlier than scheduled as requested by Vice President Sara Duterte.
Pinag-aaralan po ng Executive Director natin at saka ng Deputy Executive Director for Operations yung posibilidad na i-advance. Kaya lang po, meron po tayong masamang karanasan dyan noong 2004. Ginawa na po ng COMELEC 2004. Yung i-advance, yung magbigay ng advance. Kaya lang po, yung mga miyembro po ng Electoral Board, hindi nag-report, either tinakot, natakot, whatever reason, hindi po nag-report. Ang problem po, pag na-advance nyo na, kinakailangan po kasi pabalik yung pera. Eh, malamang po hindi mababalik yung pera. Sa COMELEC po kasi, i-charge yung ganun, babayaran po namin, kaya i-notice of disallowance po kami ng Commission on Audit. Kung papayaran po kami ng Commission on Audit, sasabihin, sige, pwede kayo mag-advance. Wala pong problema.
An additional allowance of 2,000 pesos will be given to teachers should the election for the Constitutional Convention delegates will be pushed through along with the barangay polls. The COMELEC also announced that aside from the manual elections of BSKE in October, the poll body also plans to automate the succeeding barangay elections.
Napakahirap po kasi sa mga guro natin. Alam niyo po yung pagbilang ng manual, mano-mano, para doon po sa mga kababayan natin nakakapanood ng pagbibilang sa bawat presinto. Kapag po ang election ay barangay SK, inaabot po minsan ng madaling araw. The most po, pinaka-earliest yan, alas 11 ng gabi. Kasi manumanong binibilang, may nag-o-object, may nag-o-oppose sa likod ng mga watchers, and therefore humahaba po ang proseso. At dahil po doon, kaawa-awa po yung kalagayan ng ating mga guro. Eh paano po kung mapagbigyan pa tayo sa hinihiling natin the early voting hours para sa senior citizen, PWDs, and pregnant women and indigenous people. Eh kung alas 5 pa lang pwede na makaboto pala yung mga vulnerable sectors natin na yan, ibig sabihin alas 4 pa lang ng madaling araw, nasa bawat presinto ng mga electoral board members. Tapos manual, tapos magbabasa sila, magbibilang sila hanggang sa madaling araw kung kawawa naman yung kalagayan nila. Kaya hindi po natin may tatanggi na napaka-conveniente.
Garcia says the move will be a big help to avoid violent incidents during barangay elections.
30 minutes, may result na. Ayun po ang result ng 2022 election. 23 lang ang election-related violence natin sapagkat automated po tayo.
The machines to be used are the same machines utilized during the automated elections. COMELEC had earlier said that starting 2025 elections, the poll body will use new machines for the polls. Madeline Villar Moratillo for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The House of Representatives has suspended Negros Oriental Representative Arnie Teves for 2 months for disorderly behavior. With 292 votes and no opposition nor abstention, the lawmaker unanimously voted in favor of the House Ethics Committee recommendation to suspend Teves. In a sponsorship speech for the committee report, Co-op NATCO Party List Representative and House Ethics Committee Chairman Filimon Espares says the recommendation was made after rigid and exhaustive investigation by the panel from March 15 to 21. Espares says the panel considered Teves' continued stay abroad with expired travel authorization and defiance of the chamber's call to return to the country and perform his duties as House member. The panel determined Teves' actions constitute disorderly behavior affecting the dignity, integrity, and reputation of the House of Representatives. House Speaker Martin Romualdez says the House has been fair with the case of Congressman Teves as he was given due process. However, Teves refuses to heed the call of the chamber to return to the country and perform his duty as a legislator. Based on the House rules, a lawmaker who faces a complaint before the House Ethics Committee may face expulsion, suspension, and may be reprimanded, depending on the panel's recommendation.
The Maritime Industry Authority has issued cease and desist orders against RDC Rail Maritime Services, owner of the sunken MT Princess Empress. Marina Administrator Hernani Fabia made the announcement in an ambush interview following a meeting of the Oil Spill Task Force at the Department of Justice. Fabia says Marina is issuing 2 cease and desist orders through RDC, one for the cancellation of its franchise or the company's certificate of public convenience or CPC, and the other is for its 3 remaining vessels, 2 tankers and 1 passenger vessel. The cease and desist orders will remain effective pending the result of the oil spill investigation. Meanwhile, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DENR, it says that RDC may face an administrative fine of 471,000 pesos per day from March 1 until the oil slick is resolved. DENR Undersecretary Ignatius Rodriguez says the amount is the initial calculation after the agency found in its examination that 8 out of 10 samples examined were actually contaminated. The agency is set to examine more samples from the areas affected by the oil spill.
93% of Filipinos have experienced the effects of climate change in the last 3 years. Based on the survey conducted by the Social Weather Station, or SWS, last December 2022, 17% of the respondents say they experienced the severe impacts of climate change. 52% experienced moderate impact, 24% experienced little impact, and 6% say they did not experience any impact. Meanwhile, 88% of respondents agree that they are aware of solutions to reduce climate risk, while 10% are undecided and 3% say they do not agree. The fourth quarter Social Weather Station survey was conducted face-to-face to 1,200 adult Filipinos aging from 18 years old and above.
Pag-asa has started its El Niño watch as the onset of the summer season begins. Meanwhile, the State Weather Agency also launched new equipment for extreme rainfall monitoring. Paulo Ramos has the story.
The Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Service Administration, or Pag-asa, has advised the public to be more observant in the weather situation as the summer or dry season has already begun. Pag-asa announced the end of the northeast monsoon or amihan early this week and the start of a warmer season. Dr. Annalisa Solis, Climate Monitoring Section Chief of Pag-asa, says the country will experience the development of El Niño Southern Oscillation Condition or ENSO in the tropical Pacific between the months of July and September. Dr. Solis warned the possibility of El Niño worsening the effect of the southwest monsoon or habagat due to the high water temperatures in the ocean from 5 degrees Celsius above, which may result in strong typhoons.
May possibility po na magkaroon tayo ng sunod-sunod na araw na medyo mas maiinit ang temperature. So, parang yun na din po yung tinatawag natin na heat wave. But then, kung ikukumpara natin yung heat wave sa ibang bansa, hindi po naman ganun katinding heat wave na biglang 4 or 5 degrees agad po ang taas sa sunod-sunod na araw. Sa El Niño po, 0.5 degrees centigrade pataas po doon sa normal na temperatura ng ibabaw ng dagat, doon po sa Central and Eastern Equatorial Pacific. So, sa dagat Pasipiko po. So, pag tumaas po yun kaysa karaniwan at yung tinatawag na SST anomaly ay 0.5 pataas at yun po ay posibleng mag-persist for the next 6 months. So yun na po yung hudyat na posible po yung development ng El Niño.
Meanwhile, Dr. Marcelino Villafuerte, Chief of Pag-asa Weather Services, proudly announced the official launching of SATREX, a scientific rainfall monitoring equipment acquired by the agency. Villafuerte says through SATREX, the agency will be able to monitor the hourly updates of rainfall situation in different parts of the country.
Yung formal evaluation namin in terms of percentage ng accuracy niya was not yet measured. We are still in the stage of R&D, wherein we are going to quantify specifically kung ano yung percentage ng accuracy niya. But in terms of comparing it with historical data, the historical data that we used were also based on the satellite data, and therefore we are comparing apples to apples, and therefore yung biases and errors ng estimates are removed with that.
The new equipment will also enable Pag-asa to identify the water level of dams nationwide. Pag-asa forecasts 8 to 11 typhoons will enter the Philippine area of responsibility for the rest of the year. Paulo Ramos for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Coming up, Lebanon's economic meltdown spurs protests. U.S. Secretary of State says China has not crossed the line on lethal aid to Russia. And U.S. offers Slovakia $1 billion in arms exchange for Ukraine aid. Mata ng Agila International will be back after a short break. Welcome back to Mata ng Agila International. The smell of tear gas wafted through the streets of Beirut, Lebanon Wednesday as security forces tried to disperse crowds of protesters. Hundreds of people filled the streets demonstrating against deteriorating living conditions while the country's currency plummets to new lows against the US dollar. Security forces fired tear gas as some demonstrators tried to push through barriers to reach the compound that houses government offices. At least one demonstrator and a member of the security forces have been injured. Many of those protesting are retired servicemen whose military pensions are virtually worthless. Others include people who cannot get their savings out of bank accounts. The economic meltdown has pushed most of the population into poverty. For those on fixed incomes, the currency plunge has been especially devastating. It has triggered price hikes on imported fuel, food, and other basic goods. Many supermarkets have started pricing items in dollars instead of the Lebanese pound.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China has not provided substantial military aid to Russia. This despite Beijing's ramping up of diplomatic support. Blinken has publicly warned for weeks that China is considering Russian requests for weapons to fight in Ukraine. Some reports indicate limited shipments by Chinese companies to Moscow.
If you provide lethal aid to a state sponsor of terrorism, that would be considered material support under U.S. law. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Don't you think it would be smart to tell China you provide lethal aid to a state sponsor of terrorism? They may be more deterred than if we just remain silent about that.
Senator, I've shared directly with my Chinese counterpart the serious problem that China providing lethal material support to Russia for Ukraine.
Do you think it's working? Do you think they'll provide aid?
As we speak today, we have not seen them cross that line.
President Xi Jinping this week paid a visit to Moscow. He pushed a Chinese proposal for a ceasefire in the war. This call was met with skepticism by Washington, which fears Russia would use a pause to regroup battered forces on the ground.
The Chinese military warned the USS Milius to leave its waters around the Paracel Islands on Thursday. Spokesperson Tian Junli said the U.S. warship made an illegal incursion into Chinese territorial waters. He claimed the vessel also harmed peace and stability in the region. Meanwhile, the United States denied China's claims and insisted Beijing's statement is false. A spokesperson for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command asserted the USS Milius was conducting routine operations in the South China Sea and was not expelled. The official said United States will continue to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. China claims sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea. But the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei all have overlapping claims in the South China Sea. The United States, on the other hand, frequently sends naval vessels through the South China Sea to assert the freedom of navigation in international waters.
In Poland, the United States inaugurates its first permanent military garrison. The ambassador in Warsaw says it is a sign of NATO's unity in the face of Russian aggression.
And it signals that we are here to stay. It signals to the world that the United States is committed to Poland and to the NATO alliance, that we are united in the face of Russian aggression.
The Polish Minister of Defense says the forward command of the U.S. Army's 5th Corps is already operational. He says it is from Poland that U.S. ground forces on NATO's eastern flank are commanded.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says plans are underway to modernize the country's air defense systems in the capital of Moscow. The announcement follows a series of Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory. Several air defense systems have appeared on rooftops around Moscow this year. Shoigu also says developing air defense systems is one of the priorities of the Army. He adds that the Army will form an air defense brigade with new generation S-350 air to ground missile systems. He did not say if these new plans are related to the war in Ukraine. Drone attacks on Russian territory and Moscow-annexed Crimea have increased in recent months. Last month, a drone attempted to strike a facility in the Moscow region.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has displaced millions of people. Global food and energy prices have surged in the fallout from the war. The World Bank says Ukraine's restoration needs have grown to $411 billion, just over a year since the invasion. The assessment made by Ukraine's government, the World Bank, the European Commission, and the United Nations is an increase from the $349 billion estimated in a report released in September. The $411 billion needed is 2.6 times the country's estimated GDP for 2022. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says Ukraine's 5 priorities for this year are energy infrastructure, housing, critical infrastructure, economy, and humanitarian demining. Shmyhal adds that the amount of damage and recovery needed currently does not include data on the loss of infrastructure, housing, and businesses in the occupied territories. The World Bank's Vice President for Europe and Central Asia, Anna Bierde, says that the reconstruction will take several years. She adds that support for public investment also needs to be complemented by significant private investment to increase the available financing for reconstruction. The assessment claims that the war has tipped 7.1 million people into poverty, undoing 15 years of development progress and worsening inequalities.
Slovakia announces that the U.S. had offered $1 billion worth of helicopters and missiles. The deal serves as compensation for Slovakia's commitment to send MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. Slovakia Defense Minister Jaroslav Nad announced that the U.S. offer in a press conference on Wednesday live on Facebook. According to Nad, the proposal consists of 12 helicopters with equipment, training for pilots and technicians, and over 500 Hellfire missiles. He pointed out that the offer was specifically proposed as compensation for Slovakia's recent pledge to provide fighter jets to Ukraine. On Friday, Slovakia made a diplomatic announcement that it would donate its fleet of MiG fighter planes to Ukraine, marking a significant move as the second NATO member following Poland to offer military support. He added that Slovakia's strong support for Ukraine, in addition to their good relations with the U.S. and responsible defense policy, enabled them to be the first country to receive this offer.
Russia's defense ministry has decorated pilots involved in the downing of an American drone over the Black Sea. Washington says Russian military jets bore down on the drone, but Russian officials maintain the aircraft crashed after it went out of control. Either way, it appears the Russian pilots are being rewarded for the incident. Images released by the Russian Defense Ministry show Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu awarding decorations to the pilots. The pilots received orders of courage, an honor that has been given to several members of the military fighting in the war in Ukraine. The confrontation has stirred up tensions between Washington and Moscow, sparking a rare phone call between senior U.S. and Russian military officials.
Russia's former President Dmitry Medvedev warns that arresting Vladimir Putin abroad is a declaration of war. The ICC issued a warrant of arrest for Putin on allegations of unlawful deportation of children and other war crimes in Ukraine.
Представим себе, понятно, что это ситуация, которая не реализуется никогда, да? Но тем не менее, вот представим себе, что она реализовалась. Действующий глава ядерного государства приехал вот на территорию, допустим, Германии и подвергся аресту. Что это? Объявление войны Российской Федерации. И уже в этом случае все наши средства, ракетные и прочие, полетят в Бундестаг, в офис канцлера и так далее.
Russian investigative committee also opened up a criminal case against prosecutor Karim Ahmad Khan and several ICC judges. Grounds for the complaint against ICC's team include criminal prosecution of a person known to be innocent and preparation of an attack on a representative of a foreign state enjoying international protection.
Hundreds of evacuees crossed borders to save themselves from the raging conflict between Russia and Ukraine. A refugee center in Russia immediately provides civilians with food, shelter, and clothing. Our RT correspondent Roman Kosarev files this report.
Hundreds of refugees from Artyomovsk, Soledar, and other towns have already passed through refugee centers like this one. Often they come here without anything, any belongings whatsoever. People bring humanitarian aid and they need basic necessities like underwear because once again they leave their homes without anything at all. My subscribers and I have collected a few things and now we will take them to this refugee center.
I voluntarily went to evacuate. I held out for 2 weeks, but my home was completely destroyed. I had no other place to go. I have nothing left. Wagner troops arrived. They looked around the rooms, then they asked me to evacuate. They gave me cigarettes, food, and water. I understood the attitude of the Ukrainian army back in 2014. I go into my home, then they come in. They stick a gun in my face and ask me who I am. They took everything.
Nearby, one house was destroyed, another burned down. There was rubble everywhere. Then on March 15, they began to shoot at my home. The final shot was, as I understand, from a tank. It tore right through my home. A piece of the shell fell right on a pillow where my child had been sleeping just a couple of hours earlier. There was no roof, no windows, no doors. I took my child and ran to a neighbor. Then in the morning, the woman who was hosting us said there was a soldier in my house. He said he was a Russian from the Wagner group. At first I was terrified, but they turned out to be so kind. They gave us sweets and tea and evacuated us.
Refugees from areas currently controlled by Ukraine continue to arrive at temporary refugee centers across the Donetsk People's Republic. Here they're given basic necessities, they're given medicine. Local administration is doing everything they can so their documentation, their passports and all of that is expedited. Now, once they go through all the formalities, they leave these refugee centers and some of them move further into Russia and some of them are reunited with their relatives here in Donetsk Republic. But of course, all of them are hoping to get home to Artyomovsk very soon.
Up next, French President Macron vows to push pension reform despite uproar. Teachers support school workers' strike in Los Angeles. And Brazilians protest over high interest rates. Please stay around. Mata ng Agila International will be back with more global news.
This portion is brought to you by Robic Builders, Quezon City Motor Vehicle Inspection Center.
Isang magaling na aktres. Please welcome Miss RC Munoz!
Hello. Thank you. Wow.
Sarap po yan.
Bakit maasim-asim? Ano ba to?
Kalderetang strawberry, sir.
Wala akong ammonia dito eh. Pahiram na lang po ng sapatos niyo. Ate, pahiram naman ng tsinelas mo. Wala kasi akong ammonia dito eh. Meron pa po doon tayo. Sakay natin lahat. Wala pa. Meron pa po doon.
Ba't dumadami?
Jump rope challenge with a twist. Naka-blindfold sila. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Ano tawag sa centimeters tsaka inches? Wala chicken feed yan eh. Maliit na bagay lang yan. Bakit?
Oh no! It's beer only! Sunnet 25!
Sunnet 25.
French President Emmanuel Macron vows to push through with his controversial pension reforms despite public opposition and sometimes violent protests. He says he's prepared to accept unpopularity as a result of the move. Macron says given the choice between short-term unpopularity in opinion polls and the general interest of the country, he will choose what is best for France. Meanwhile, the demonstrations continue with union leaders saying the rolling strikes will go on until Monday. On Wednesday, students rallied outside of the Ministry of Education. Today, up to 50% of the country's teachers in nursery and elementary schools are expected to be off the job. Blockades are still up at oil refineries, potentially creating severe fuel shortages. The garbage continues to accumulate on Paris streets as trash collectors remain on strike. Hundreds of people have been arrested as the protests often turn violent after dark. Demonstrators accuse police of using heavy-handed tactics. Tear gas and water cannons have frequently been used to disperse unruly crowds. The protests have also raised questions over whether France can host King Charles III's visit on Sunday. It is Charles' first foreign state visit as monarch.
King Charles III's visit to France is at risk from strikes and disruptions. The tour of the new King of England is intended as a statement of cross-channel friendship after years of arguments between London and Paris. London has been in discord as French President Emmanuel Macron pushes a pension reform using constitutional powers. Protesters stage transport strikes and dump garbage on the streets. King Charles and consort Camilla are scheduled to visit France from March 26 to 29 and will meet up with Macron at a state banquet at Versailles Palace. The royal couple also plans to visit Bordeaux for a tramway ride. However, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission warns that the country's current troubles may hinder the royal couple's agenda.
In Los Angeles, California, over 500,000 children were shut out of their classrooms as school workers there began a three-day walkout over pay. California Congressman Adam Schiff tweets that caring for students is one of the most meaningful careers. He says he stands with the bus drivers, custodians, teachers, aides, and calls to invest in schools and pay fair wages. Educators say they suffer the same plight as the bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and special education assistants who are protesting. They say they are all fighting for livable wages.
Our brothers and sisters, our coworkers are living on a $24,000 a year salary, which in LA, in California, we know that's below the poverty line.
I'm on the front line and we're not getting livable wages. We haven't gotten an increase in about 5 years while everything's going up. Inflation's going up and we can't pay our rent.
Everybody knows pretty much that teachers are underpaid, but we're talking about bus drivers, the cafeteria workers, the people who clean the schools, the TAs. They're grossly underpaid.
We need to have fair compensation. A lot of us can't even live in the areas where we teach. It's a nightmare for a lot of us. A lot of us have to have 2 jobs in order to survive.
President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador says the U.S. State Department are liars and slanderers who have no proof that torture is practiced in Mexico. Lopez Obrador blames the U.S. Human Rights Report that points to arbitrary detentions and enforced disappearances. In the report released on March 20, the U.S. State Department also notes that there are restrictions on freedom of expression, violence against journalists, and acts of government corruption, along with high rates of impunity. Passenger trains have started running again in Greece for the first time in 3 weeks since a deadly head-on collision left 57 people dead in the country's worst rail disaster. On Wednesday, some intercity passenger trains resumed service, but the main line where the crash occurred on February 28 remains closed. It will not reopen until April 1st, and officials say it will take another 5 weeks before there is a full schedule of train services. The disaster sparked weeks of angry and occasionally violent protests. At their peak, more than 65,000 people took to the streets to protest. The country's rail watchdog has found serious safety problems across the network, including poor basic training of critical staff. 4 rail officials, including the station master on duty during the accident, faced criminal charges and possible life sentences. Rail officials say they will do everything humanly possible to win back the confidence of the passengers.
Burned vehicles on roadsides, slogans of the Gulf Clan cartel written on walls, and military trucks patrolling the streets are a common occurrence in Bajo Cauca in northwestern Colombia. This since illegal miners started protests over 20 days ago. The miners are protesting against the government's destruction of heavy machinery used to dredge up soil to find gold. Miners shut down roads. They attacked a town hall and a bank in the area. President Gustavo Petro accuses the Gulf Clan of being behind the attacks. Petro has suspended a ceasefire with the drug cartel.
Trade unions demonstrate in front of the Central Bank of Brazil, or BCB, in Sao Paulo. The bank is expected to keep its key interest rate unchanged. This despite pressure from the government to lower it. The current rate level of 13.75% is one of the highest in the world. The BCB's Monetary Policy Committee will release its decision at the end of its second meeting of the year. Deliberations are ongoing. She is Buanoy, is Thailand's shopping mall gorilla who has sat alone in a cage for 30 years. Activists around the world have long called for the primate to be moved, but the family who owns Buanoy has resisted public and government pressure. They refuse to let go of the critically endangered animal. Director and founder of Wildlife Friends Foundation Thailand, Edwin Weeks, says Buanoy has been completely on her own for the last 15 years. Her friend and partner has died. Weeks says the environment she lives in is a very unnatural circumstance. He says the way Buanoy has been living on her own is not the way it should be.
First of all, her environment, the place where she lives, needs to be of much larger space. It needs to be more natural or as close to nature as possible. And if possible, she should have friends of her own species, of her own kind, to share that enclosure with. That is the ideal situation for her. We have asked Patazu several times. I have visited last time, only 2 months ago, the zoo and talked to the general manager over there, to look for a solution that would benefit the well-being of the animals. All of them, not just the only gorilla. There's chimpanzees, orangutans, there's bonobos there, a lot of other wildlife that needs an improved life as well. So we've tried to talk with them, but they made it very clear that they're not willing to close down and want to continue operating the zoo on the top of the shopping mall.
The European Union says it wants to clean up the so-called greenwashing of consumer products. Environment Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevicius says many labels contain bogus information.
More than half of the claims we see in the European market, they are vague, misleading, or even based on nothing at all. And this undermines trust and penalizes companies, businesses who are the ones really taking effective steps and making real efforts towards greater sustainability. There are also too many different environmental labels, and this creates confusion.
There is no indication when the new regulations will be ready.
Coming right up, Germany sues Meta over Facebook online threats. First 3D printed rocket lifts off but fails to reach Earth's orbit. And basketball teams talk and text, and Meralco joins PBA semifinals party. Catch more news when Mata ng Agila International returns.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Environmental Action Germany, known as DUH, sues Meta over Facebook death threats against its staff. According to the group, Meta failed to respond to the threats of violence directed at DUH Director Jürgen Resch and others in a Facebook group. DUH head says the group will no longer tolerate the violence prompted by such social media groups. This has been linked to DUH's campaigns to ban heavily polluting vehicles to promote air quality rules in Germany. The group is taking action against Meta for making the digital space as an avenue for the threats. Meta responds that it did take action when it became aware of the threats of its platform. Last week, German lawmaker Renate Künast won a case against Facebook. Her victory made the company pay damages and remove fake codes pertaining to her from its site.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the country's banking sector is stabilizing as leaders seek to calm global worries. This after the recent failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank rattled the industry. Stock markets have risen as fears of a financial crisis eased. The U.S. Federal Reserve and other major banks kicked off a coordinated effort this week to boost the lenders' access to liquidity. The collapses had caused a crisis of confidence. Many customers of similarly sized banks started withdrawing their money. They deposited funds in larger institutions, firms considered too big for the government not to bail them out if they faced failure. Yellen suggests that the U.S. stands ready to intervene further if needed.
The steps we took were not focused on aiding specific banks or classes of banks. Our intervention was necessary to protect the broader U.S. banking system. And similar actions could be warranted if smaller institutions suffered deposit runs that pose the risk of contagion. I believe that our actions reduced the risk of further bank failures that would have imposed losses on the Deposit Insurance Fund, which is paid for through fees on banks.
The U.S. Federal Reserve raised its benchmark lending rate Wednesday. It seeks to strike a balance between curbing high inflation and averting further upheaval in the commercial banking sector. The quarter-point increase, which was in line with expectations, lifted the target range to 4.75 to 5% at the end of a two-day policy meeting.
My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective.
While the Fed has expressed commitment to lowering inflation, there are concerns that higher rates could deepen banking sector turmoil. This after Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. The Fed says recent banking sector developments are likely to result in tighter credit conditions for households and businesses. They are expected to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation.
Relativity Space's 3D printed Terran 1 rocket, in its third attempt, finally took off after delays but did not reach the Earth's orbit. The methane-powered rocket launched late Wednesday night in Cape Canaveral, Florida, making it the largest 3D printed object. Despite meeting some mission objectives, an anomaly caused the engine on its second stage to shut down, preventing it from reaching orbit. Although it did not reach its goal, the mission represents a significant step forward for space exploration, demonstrating the viability of ambitious 3D printing technology. Standing 110 feet tall with a diameter of 7.5 feet, the Terran 1 rocket is capable of carrying 1,250 kilograms to low Earth orbit and is priced at $12 million per launch. The company is already working on the successor to Terran 1, a larger reusable line of rockets called Terran R, expected to launch next year.
The Philippine Basketball Association is set for the 2023 Governor's Cup semifinals as Talk and Text and Meralco advance. For the first game, TNT Tropang Giga defeated the Phoenix Super LPG Fuel Masters 132-105. TNT's Ronde Hollis Jefferson led the team with a triple-double with 18 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 assists. For the second game, Meralco survived Magnolia in overtime, 113-107. Meralco charged back from a 7-point deficit in the last 3 minutes of regulation play. Aaron Black provided a buzzer beater to force OT that solidified their win. TNT and Meralco complete the semis cast, joining Barangay Ginebra and San Miguel. The 2023 Governor's Cup semifinals will begin tomorrow, March 24 at 3 p.m.
In Sweden, an old rule on agricultural vehicles allows teenagers to drive trucks or even luxury sedans without a proper driver's license. The drivers, however, can only drive up to 30 kilometers per hour.
So this is my car. It's a BMW in the 5 Series, F11, I think. And I got it for a year ago in April on my birthday. And I usually use it when I travel to school or meet out with friends. For the cars that see us in the traffic, we have a big special symbol, like a orange triangle we have in the back of the car, so it symbolizes that we only can drive 30 kilometers an hour.
And to motivate your Thursday night, here's a quote from former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill. Success is walking from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm.
And as Dory would put it in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming.
And keep on moving. And for tonight, that's a wrap for our news. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels. I am Ricky Matay.
And I am Nina Richielago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.